Good morning, North America. Good afternoon, Europe, and good evening to everyone watching from India. This is US Election Watch. I'm Allister D'Souza in Washington, D.C. The headlines. Trump meets Ukrainian President Zelenskyy amid frosty ties. It's the first meeting since Zelenskyy said Trump can't end the war. Harris set to make her first visit to the border in 3 years. Harris heads to the Mexico border as immigration remains a hot-button issue. Harris criticizes Trump's record on manufacturing jobs. Trump slams Harris ahead of her visit to the border. Category 4 Hurricane Helene slams Florida. Millions without power as the tropical storm batters parts of the United States. Former President Donald Trump, who has been very vocal and deeply skeptical about the U.S. involvement in Ukraine, has just met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in New York. The two men shook hands, and Trump said it was an honor to meet with Zelenskyy. Donald Trump suggested he would try to broker an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine. Trump said he has a very good relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, this meeting comes as Trump has previously called Zelenskyy the greatest salesman on earth, referring to the amount of aid the U.S. has given to Ukraine to help fight the Russian invasion. Yesterday, Zelenskyy visited the White House, meeting President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, both separately. The U.S. has spent more than $100 billion in aid and weapons for Ukraine. Now, for more on the story, we are joined by John Rosomondo. He is a commentator and also a U.S. national security expert. John, thanks very much for your time this morning. John, former President Donald Trump, as we just heard, meeting with Zelenskyy. How did that meeting play out between the two men?
Well, I believe that President Trump said what he's said all along, that he wants to end the war in Ukraine, which has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, and to bring about an end because he does not believe that Ukraine has the resources to hold out against the Russians. I mean, the Russians have ramped up their commitment to the war in terms of arms and manpower. And there's only so much that the West can give to Ukraine at this point because the industrial base of the entire NATO alliance is nowhere near where it needs to be. One of the things that President Trump made a point of when he was president the first time was getting NATO to increase its commitments to 2% of GDP. One of my last things I'll say is that the industrial base can't keep up with the demand of the war.
Right, John, but given that President Trump has been quite not really complimentary towards Zelenskyy in the past. The two men don't really share a very amicable relationship, according to reports. So how is this going to move forward if Trump is elected president?
Well, Zelenskyy is going to be faced with someone who he's going to have to do business with. It's unlike Biden, who's given him a blank check, and also Trump is going to have to find a way to get Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table because at this point in time, there's not much incentive for Putin to come to the negotiating table. Although Trump believes that his relationship with Putin could potentially get him to the bargaining table, but I think that he's going to have a very difficult time reaching a solution.
All right, let's talk about Biden a bit. Now, Biden has refused to lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range missiles against Russia. This despite open calls from European allies, as well as members of Congress who say that Biden needs to perhaps rethink this stance. Now, what's Biden's thinking on this, and any chance of him really changing his mind? Because that clearly did not happen this time around when Zelenskyy met him yesterday.
Well, I think that Biden's idea is he doesn't want to escalate things. He doesn't want to antagonize the Russian barons using nuclear weapons and feeling that it's cornered. However, as long as Ukraine has to fight with his hands tied behind its back, it's going to be in a real difficult situation, even getting to the bargaining table. I'd have to say one thing that the invasion of the Kursk region of Russia was a stroke of genius on his part because it gives the Ukrainians something that they can bargain for in exchange for the territories currently controlled by the Russians on Ukrainian soil.
All right. Before I let you go very quickly here, John, any change of stance on long-range missiles if Harris is president?
I think that it remains to be seen. Like a lot of things, Harris has not been very forthright in terms of what she believes on anything. We don't know, what she believes on a whole bunch of domestic policy issues, let alone foreign policy issues. Considering that she'll probably keep a lot of the same people in place, I don't see much change on the horizon.
Right, thanks very much indeed. That was John Rosamondo. He's commentator on U.S. national security, joining us this morning. Moving on to other news now, a grand jury in the U.S. has reportedly indicted several Iranians on charges related to hacking Donald Trump's presidential campaign. The indictment comes in the wake of increased worries over election interference from Iran, Russia, and China as well. NDTV's Vishal Vivek has more.
Absolutely obliterated. We're gathered tonight to talk about to defeat Kamala Harris.
Federal prosecutors in the United States have filed criminal charges against multiple Iranian hackers for allegedly targeting members of former President Donald Trump's presidential campaign, according to reports. The charges pertain to an Iranian operation that allegedly stole internal Trump campaign communications and sent them to journalists and individuals associated with President Joe Biden's re-election campaign. This happened before Kamala Harris became the Democratic nominee. A Microsoft report last month said Iranian hackers had sent a spear phishing email in June to a high-ranking official on a presidential campaign. In the same month, Google's cybersecurity arm said Iranians tried to hack into Biden's campaign as well, but there are no indications those attempts succeeded. A statement from US security agencies earlier this month said that foreign actors are increasing their election influence activities as the US presidential election approaches. The indictment is the latest in a string of federal indictments against foreign hackers that have allegedly targeted government agencies and individuals. Trump's engagement with Iran doesn't end there, as his campaign recently said that US intelligence officials told him Tehran has been plotting to assassinate him. Top security officials in the United States believe Iran has sought for years to assassinate Trump, seeking revenge for the 2020 killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, who was one of the most influential figures in the country. With Vishal Vivek, Bureau Report for NDTV World.
Let's turn to some other news now. Let's turn our attention to one of the 7 swing states that will determine who could be sitting in the White House after the elections. North Carolina is a state where a win by Vice President Kamala Harris in November could open a crucial path to victory, but polls show the race is neck and neck. A Democratic presidential candidate hasn't won North Carolina since Obama way back in 2008. Now, if you are Trump or Harris, there's one voter group neither party can afford to ignore in North Carolina: Indian Americans, along with other Asian Americans as well. To tell us more about this, we're joined by Chavi Khanna Koneru. She is co-founder and executive director at North Carolina Asian Americans Together. It's a non-partisan group that is working to get people out there and vote. Chavi, thanks for your time this morning. Chavi, let's dive straight into this. There are roughly about 236,000 Asian Americans and Pan-Islander voters in North Carolina, a more than 50% increase from what was seen a little over a decade ago. Remind us how crucial this vote bank is for both candidates, given that Trump won North Carolina in the previous elections by just 74,000 votes.
Exactly. North Carolina is a battleground state because it's always been extremely close. And Asian Americans, Indian Americans, who are the largest percentage of the Asian Americans in North Carolina, have the ability to be the margin of victory in the state. The Asian American voter base has grown about 86% between 2010 and 2020. As you mentioned, the last presidential election was determined by less than 75,000 votes. And we know in these critical regions in the state, the Asian American, Indian American population is greater than the margin of victory. So if they were to turn out, they would have the ability to determine this election all on their own.
All right, Chavi, now the Harris campaign believes it can flip the state from the Republicans for the first time since 2008. As we've been talking about, Obama was the last presidential candidate to do that. What do Indian Americans, along with other Asian Americans, really want? Yes, many are perhaps upbeat about having a commander-in-chief with South Asian heritage, but that's not enough. They're going to want more. So what's really on top of mind for them?
Yeah, so an important thing to note is that of the South Asian voters in North Carolina, over half are registered as unaffiliated with either political party, which means they care more about the issues than they do about their party affiliation. They're not going to be voting along party lines. And what we've found is that the issues, yes, while there is a segment of the population that is very excited about Kamala Harris being half Indian, they're more excited about the prospect of the changes that could be made with a Democratic president. So the things that people are most interested in, concerned about, is the cost of living, education, immigration, healthcare. And these are the issues that we see top of mind for these voters. Another one that has come up for Asian American voters is reproductive rights. And we know post the Supreme Court U.S. Dobbs decision, this is something that a lot of communities have been speaking about. So we're looking for candidates who can speak to the issues that Indian Americans are most concerned with in this election.
Do you get any sense of which way they're leaning towards?
We've done some polling that has found that the Indian American population in North Carolina does tend to lean a little bit more Democrat. However, the important thing is that these voters really are up for grabs by either party, and neither party is doing enough to reach out to them.
All right, let's look at some of the controversy surrounding North Carolina at the moment. There's an important question that will crop up on the ballots when North Carolina votes on November 5th. It's to amend the state constitution to say that only U.S. citizens can vote. The law, as we know, already has such a provision. So why are Republicans wanting to see this added to the Constitution? What's the politics behind it, and how is it going to go down for first-time voters, especially for, say, Indian Americans?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is part of a concerted attack on immigrant communities here in North Carolina. The demographics of the state have changed significantly, and there's a portion of the Republican Party that isn't eager to allow immigrant voices to be heard at the same level as other voices in the state. So as a executive director who is both serving an immigrant community as a lawyer myself, it is very problematic to change the North Carolina state constitution to say something that it already does. And the only purpose it would serve is to exasperate xenophobic rhetoric and incite discrimination and violence on immigrant communities. So the claims that ineligible voters are committing voter fraud are unfounded. There's been studies around this. There's safeguards in place already to ensure the sanctity of our elections. And so the purpose of this amendment is not to secure our elections, it is to further anti-immigrant sentiments. And in a state like North Carolina that is becoming more and more diverse, full of more immigrants who are contributing to the economy, it's very important for us to oppose this kind of amendment.
But how would that actually scare away first-time voters? Because to me, it seems like just a clause there to amend the Constitution. So why would that actually keep people away?
It's more so that it creates fear and a chilling effect, because when you're changing something that already exists, it's
Right.
making people think, is this a problem? Is this something that we need to be worried about? And what happens is that newly naturalized citizens are often afraid to participate in the process. And in North Carolina, which has a lot of new immigrants, particularly from the Indian community, it is critical that all of these folks come out, have their voices heard at the voting box. And so it's important to not have any rules that might make them feel more fear or uncertainty about the process.
Right, Chavi, before you go, you are, of course, in North Carolina. Appreciate you joining us this morning. How are things with regards to the hurricane?
Winds and rain right now, but hopefully we'll be okay.
Right, thanks very much indeed, Chavi. Well, thankfully that line stayed on fine. We were worried that we might not be able to reach you because of the storm outages there in North Carolina and various other places that have been affected by the latest hurricane. Let's now turn to some other news right now. A look at the economy, and it's just over a month before the U.S. presidential polls. As we know, the race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump remains close. However, according to the latest Bloomberg News and Morning Consult poll, where Trump has enjoyed a consistent lead. According to another poll from a university in Connecticut in battleground states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, Trump's edge on the economy was 2 or 4 percentage points more. The trend line across a number of surveys, including from Fox News, CBS, and Suffolk University, USA Today, shows that Kamala Harris gaining ground with voters on the economy. We're now joined by Xenia Bale. She is an academic and a commentator. She joins us from Cleveland. I was just wondering about this slight lead that Kamala Harris has on the economy. How significant is that, would you think?
See, it's quite significant because when it comes to policies by Democrats, right, there is always apprehension regarding the economy. And the economy actually is one of the number one concerns for voters, right? When you talk about the middle class, when you talk about economy at a more micro level, when you talk about paying groceries, when you talk about childcare, right, that's been a big issue. When you talk about just basics of getting by for an American family, it has become very challenging with inflation at a 9.1%, right, starting at around 2022. It has reduced a bit, with the Fed very recently reducing or dropping that interest rate. However, grocery prices are still high. American families are still struggling. The middle class is still struggling, excuse me. And Kamala Harris at the Economic Club has talked about, the opportunity economy, the economy for the middle class. She claims to be a capitalist for the middle class, and she has been consistent in using that word to quell and to dismiss sort of the statement by Trump that she's a socialist, she's a communist, right? He talked about in the presidential debate on ABC how Kamala Harris, like her father, is a Marxist, right? But Kamala Harris has staunchly said that she's a capitalist, and that statement is to appeal to those middle class voters in specifically swing states such as Nevada, such as Pennsylvania, Georgia, wherein the economy, aside from immigration, aside from reproductive rights and all these other issues, economy is a very big issue, right? Rising prices, grocery bills, all of that. And one thing that I'd like to point out
Yeah,
to your viewers, Allister, is that the United States has an advantage over other developed countries, or as they say, first world countries in the world, is that the United States has a reserve currency. So that really helps the US borrow with its debt at 35 trillion, right? Over 35 trillion at this point, the public debt. And because it's able to borrow
right.
significantly and consistently, it's able to reinvest in the economy. But then the public debt is also a big concern, right? And the overall economic impact of that. So when we talk about all
So,
these
Zenia,
factors,
now,
economy is going to be a very big issue. My apologies. Go ahead. Yes.
yeah, Zena, sorry to interrupt you, but the Harris campaign thinks that they can claim back the narrative on the economy before November 5th. We're maybe seeing that a little bit in the polls now. But do you really think it's wishful thinking, or do you clearly see a voter mindset changing here? Because at the end of the day, people are still complaining about high prices, as you mentioned, in grocery stores, things like jobs, wanting really a better future as far as just everyday life goes.
Yes, absolutely. It's, as I said, it's one of the biggest issues, right? We talk about Bidenomics, we talk about Trumpnomics, we talk about Trump's plan to help curb inflation, reduce inflation, help American families. I think what it gets down to, Alistair, is helping the middle class, right? It's really appealing to those middle class voters. What Harris is doing is she's trying to paint a picture of Trump as being a capitalist who only works for the rich, right? The super rich, the 1 or 2% in this country who have a lot of wealth and who accumulated a lot of wealth from being on the board of big corporations, being the CEOs of big corporations or founding big corporations, right? What she talks about is instead having an opportunity economy, being a capitalist for the middle class. And Trump, in response to that, has talked about how
Right.
under Biden prices have been at its highest, though they haven't been. Inflation actually in 1981 in the US was at its peak, pretty much. At this point, grocery prices are about 13.5%. We've seen an increase, right, all under Biden. So there is definitely that disadvantage due to these high
Sure.
prices and inflation that Kamala Harris has. But then she tries to counter that with talk about her
Xenia, we'll have
policies
to
about
unfortunately leave it
the
there for now.
middle
Xenia
class. Yeah.
Bale there joining us from Cleveland. She's an academic and a commentator. We are running out of time. Xenia, hope to talk to you at another point in time. Now, according to reports, the Joe Biden administration is planning to soon issue a regulation to cement sweeping asylum restrictions it enacted at the southern border recently. Biden issued a proclamation in June suspending the entry of most migrants crossing the US-Mexico border illegally. After the stringent measures came into effect, illegal border crossings plunged to a 4-year low. Now, Kamala Harris visits the southern border today in Arizona as she plans to go on the offensive with Trump over immigration. Donald Trump has launched a collection of branded watches for a whopping price of $100,000 each. Reports suggest that the watches are made out of 18-karat gold and encrusted in diamonds. The former president is not personally selling the watches, but appears to have given permission for the use of his name and brand by a watch company. It can be recalled that Trump had recently launched a new cryptocurrency venture. The burning question is whether a sitting president, of course, could be associated with such businesses. That's it for now on US Election Watch. Thanks for your company. I'm Allister in Washington, D.C.